Hello. Oh God, this is already cricket. Hello. It's, just one of them days. Yeah, it's one of those days. Hello, friends. You know what? This is a different angle. Yes, it is a different angle. Yes, I'm sitting on the floor. Yes, because this is actually quite comfortable. And this is kind of a throwback to when I used to film on this side of the room in the house instead of at the dining room table. I noticed in my last video there is a consistent humming in the background. It may be in this video, but it may not be as loud, but I know it was in the last video, and that's because my dining room table is right next to the kitchen, and my fridge does that thing where it cools itself down and it gets loud. And so it creates this humming in the background that I had not noticed before. And like now it is the most obvious thing, and it grinds my nerves. It doesn't always do this, but ironically it's when I sit down to film, because keep in mind, like, I'm a whole parent. And so I do spend time with my kid and do bedtime routine and reading and everything. And so the only time that I truly can film is at night. And it tends to do this a lot, I think, at night. So if you can hear that, I apologize. I ain't trying to listen. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. I ain't trying to make no further adjustments in that. But welcome to my January wrap up. I don't know, y'all. I think January was just overall a tough month for me, because we all know that I went through some things in January. January was pretty rough, but somehow I still managed to do some things. So I did film a January mid-month wrap up. So proud of myself for that. Otherwise, doing this video would have been the bane of my literal existence. So I'm happy that I actually took the initiative to do that. And so we're basically just going to be covering the rest of the books that I read in January. I do have a couple of statistics. I am using Allie from Hardback Hoarder. I believe that's Allie's channel's name. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm 99.9% sure. Allie has this amazing spreadsheet that a few people put me onto. Jess in particular put me on to Allie's spreadsheet. So I did buy a copy from her this year, and I've been using it. So I have some very, very intense statistics, but I was thinking I would save that information probably for like quarterly check-in, where we talk about how my reading is going, the best, the worst, etc. So I'm just going to give you a couple of things that I have to offer in terms of statistics. So I did end up reading 38 books in the month of January. I had 8,908 pages read, 97.5 hours of audio listening. 58% of the titles that I read this month were diverse in some way, and my average rating was a 3.8. Now, surprisingly, as someone who works and is a parent, I was shocked to know that my dominant format for reading this month was physical. I think it was somewhere around like 44%. That was shocking. The age categories were pretty heavily split, I believe, between children's and young adult. They were kind of close, with, I think, adult coming in last and then middle grade coming second to last. Now, the way that Allie has the spreadsheet, I typically would separate picture books out from children's, but it's fine because middle grade technically is children's as well. YA technically is considered children's as well. It's all considered kidlit, but it's fine. It's fine. Whenever I do my wrap-ups, I will make the clear distinctions on like what is what. So I am going to break this video up into categories. I know that in my mid-month wrap-up, I did not do that. I just did everything in a chronological fashion, I believe. I think I just, in the order that I read everything is how I reviewed it. But this time I'm going to break it up by categories. Anything that I have read, and have reviewed in that last video, I will just mention. And then anything, of course, that I haven't reviewed, we'll get into more depth. So I start with picture books, then we go into children's / early chapter books, then middle grade, then young adult, and then any comics, graphics, and manga. Now that section is going to be primarily adult. It's the same way I did it for I think my best books is how I did that. So if there is a middle grade graphic novel, it will be covered in the middle grade graphic novel section. I hope this all makes sense. If it doesn't, I mean, y'all will tell me. catch me looking down or looking over, it's because I do have my notes on the side of me. Let's go ahead and start with our picture book category. So I ended up reading a small amount of picture books this past month. I don't want to get into like the specifics of this, but vendors are being very interesting right now. And so there were a lot of picture books that came out in the month of January that I intended to read. However, we didn't get copies of them until very, very late. So you probably will see an influx of picture book reading for this month as opposed to last month. So at the beginning of the month, I read Our Building, Dear Black Girl, A Song for August, 5 Stories, and I Know How to Draw an Owl. So I talked about all of those in my mid-month. The new ones that I ended up reading after mid-month were Freedom Braids, which I loved because it gave the reader a lot of great information about where braiding came from and how it's been utilized as a form of communication, and the way that enslaved peoples use that to communicate with each other and to get to free colonies. And I gave that one 4 stars. I read Lily's Dream with my kiddo, which is a fairy friendship book. It literally is about a little girl and a fairy meeting and becoming friends. The artwork in this one is absolutely delightful, and I ended up giving that one 5 stars. And the last one that we ended up reading together was Wash Day with Mama, and this one is different than I think a lot of the picture books I've seen that deal with like positive hair representation or like hair affirmations. This one literally is a cultural insight to what it's like to be Black and have a wash day. And while I don't know if it meant as much to me as it did my little one, I appreciated that because she was able to look at the pictures in that book and say, hey, we do this, or hey, can we try that? And it gave us some new ideas of what to do with wash day, because I have a little kid that has a lot of hair and it's thick and she's tender-headed. And so I have to be very creative with wash days, and even when I'm like rebraiding her hair, I have to be creative with it. So that gave us some new ideas and things that we could use in our own personal wash days. So we're going to start now with our children's or early chapter book series, and the one book that I have in this category is Gabby Torres Gets a Billion Followers. This is by Angela Dominguez. I was excited for this one because it is in some ways a spin-off from her Stella Diaz series, but you don't have to read that one in order to pick this one up. It follows a main character by the name of Gabby, who's really into conservation efforts, and she gets the chance to possibly join this club. Her parents are happy with it, but she wants to be more involved, and so she kind of wants to be like their social media coordinator, but her parents feel like she's too young to have social media, and there's lots of reasons why they don't want her to have access to social media. But I think what's interesting is that they put these restrictions on her. They say, hey, if you're going to do this for your group, you want to help navigate what your group can do via a website like Instagram. We're fine with it, but you have to have parental supervision. You can't log into the account without us. Clearly, she doesn't have a cell phone to be able to access that information, but things kind of go left. And so it ends up being a great conversation about conservation, about teamwork, about friendship, because she has some struggles with her friends along the way, which I found to be really interesting. And she learns about the positive and negative aspects of social media. And I love the dialoguing that she has with her parents towards the end about the positives and negatives related to social media, because they don't really do that great of a job of talking about that in the beginning. It wasn't necessarily like the best book that I've read. I gave it 3.5 stars, and it's being classified a lot as like a middle grade graphic novel. But to me, when I read it, it felt like a good, highly illustrated novel, perfect for ages around like 7 to 9. So not completely in the middle grade range, but not completely out of it either. It's somewhere in between, but it was good. I enjoyed it. I think it's going to be a series, so I definitely will end up picking up the next one. All right, so the next category we have is our middle grade category. I did already talk about a couple of these books in my mid-month wrap-up. So the first one that I talked about was Anzu and the Realm of Darkness, which was a graphic novel. Shiny Misfits, which was another graphic novel. Emma and the Love Spell, which was more of a paranormal, contemporary first crush type of book. I also talked about New Girl, which is a graphic novel. Absolutely love it. Period power in that book. Fantastic. Artwork was amazing. Hopefully we're getting a book number 2. And then I have 3 more that I read post the mid-month wrap-up. I misspoke. I was like, oh, I only have 3. No, I have 4 because I was leaving out a graphic novel, and the graphic novel that I was leaving out is Upstage. This is by Robin Easter. It is a fun, summery, contemporary exploration of friendship, first partnership. So it focuses on a main character by the name of Ash. They've gone to this summer camp. It is a theater summer camp with their best friend, and their best friend lives in a completely different state. They don't really get too much into the geographical aspects of it, but they don't go to the same school during the school year. So they are excited to meet back up with their best friend because they get to go to this theater camp. But as a reader, you eventually find out that Ash actually has a crush on their best friend, and they're hoping that this will be the summer that they can kind of explore like what that means and finally communicate that they have a crush. It's really interesting. I think the artwork was really nice. I think that this is, in essence, a love letter to theater kids. It is a glimpse at what it's like to have those sparking feelings for a person for the very first time. It talks about the complications of having somewhat like romantic feelings for your best friend. I think it had wonderful queer representation. It talked a lot about learning how to take ownership or take responsibility for one's own actions, because let me tell you, Ash goes through some serious ups and downs in terms of being able to manage their emotions, which at that age, we're talking about middle school, you're hitting puberty, emotional regulation becomes a thing again. Having a 5-year-old right now, I'm learning a lot about emotional regulation and what that means for someone at that age. But I've heard a lot of people say that when your kids get to that middle school age, it's almost like they're reverting back and having to learn that emotional regulation again. So Ash struggles a lot with how they feel and not being able to verbalize what they're feeling. They're very closed off. They are very, I don't want to say incapable of making friends, because they do become capable of making friends, but they don't want to at first because they are so caught up in the relationship that they have with their best friend that they kind of take it out on everyone else when things don't work out perfectly. Because when they go to the camp, I probably should have said this, the two of them are used to being bunk mates, but when they get to camp this year, they're in separate cabins, and Ash has a lot of difficulty reckoning with those feelings, and so they project on a lot of people. And it comes full circle, because at first you're kind of like, ooh, this is kind of cringy, but you realize these kids are like 6th, 7th grade, so it is going to be quite cringy. It's going to be quite cringy, but it does come full circle. And I think that Ash does have that moment where they're like, dang, I have not been the best person to be around. But it was wonderful. I do like the whole character development. It's not plot driven, it is character driven, but the artwork was fantastic. Like I said, the queer rep was amazing. And if you know any theater kids, this is like the perfect book for that. The next one that I ended up reading was Safe Harbor, and this is by Padma Venkatraman. And I don't know if I've read Padma before. I feel like I have, or maybe I'm just familiar with her books. So this might be the first novel of hers that I've read. I've seen her stuff plenty of times, but this is a quick novel in verse. I ended up giving this one 3.5 stars. I don't know if I gave my rating for Upstage, by the way. It was a 4-star read. Safe Harbor, I gave 3.5 stars. It follows a main character by the name of Geeta, and she's immigrated to the United States with her mother. And there are multiple conversations about the impact of immigration, having to make new friendships, especially when you are coming from a different cultural background and moving to the United States, and you have kids that are not open and accepting of new cultural backgrounds. And so she deals with quite a bit of bullying in the beginning, but there is a redemption arc for a side character that kind of realizes like, yeah, I don't like how we're treating her, and so like I'm just not going to do this anymore. I think the most interesting aspect of this one for me was Geeta's development and how she perceived the relationship between her mom and her dad. So her mom and her dad end up not immigrating together. Her dad ends up staying in India, and they come to the US without him. And she has this perception of her dad and is very frustrated at the fact that they're not together. Almost like it's anger towards her mom. And so her perception of her dad initially, and my perspective as an adult, is a little tainted. But there comes this moment where she has to reckon with, well, what really was the relationship between my mom and my dad like? And when she is able to work through those things, she understands why her mom makes the decisions that she makes. And I think that that's particularly normal for any child, where you are used to living a certain life, or having a certain routine, having both parents there, and then one parent has to make a decision, and as a child there is this sense of unfairness to it, and you don't understand why. And I think I probably resonate with that more as an adult, because of the fact that I know that there's a possibility that that resentment may be a part of my life at one point. Like, so why is it just us? You know, those questions do come up, and it's pure curiosity, and they're very, very valid feelings. And so I like the way that Padma explored that. There's also this another book where we're seeing some conservation elements in it, which I think, to be honest with you, is a newer thing that is happening in children's and middle grade, where we have characters who are interested in conservation efforts. Some, it could just be, you know, recycling and making sure that the school is clean. And for others, like in this book, Safe Harbor, we're looking at like animal conservation, where she's able to assist with some animal conservation, but it opens up the door for her to make new friendships. Overall, I think it was thoughtful. I thought it was well written. It didn't necessarily draw me in. I wasn't blown away by it. It's not because it was written in verse. I've read plenty of books in verse. As a matter of fact, I finished one this month that literally had me break down in tears at work. It just wasn't it didn't have that punch to it, but I did like it well enough. And like I said, I ended up giving it 3.5 stars. Okay, so the next one I read was one of my most anticipated releases for the month of January, and that is No Purchase Necessary. And I'm going to look down because I want to make sure I get this pronunciation as correct as possible. And it's by Mariana Yagam, and this did not disappoint. I gave this one 4 stars. I really did enjoy it. This was the first time, to my knowledge, that I've read a book, a middle grade book, where the main character is Sri Lankan, and it plays a role in the whole dynamic of the story, because people automatically assume that Aja is Indian, and he has to explain like, no, I'm not Indian, I'm Sri Lankan, and they're completely different countries. And so no, we're not the same. So I like that dynamic to it, because if there are middle grade books that have a main character that is Sri Lankan, it's not a lot of them. And so I was happy that that was a conversation that did happen in the context of this book. So we do focus on a main character by the name of Aja, who goes to school, and automatically the microaggressions just right off the bat from the teacher, who calls him AJ. It is frustrating. It is so, I got so pissed on his behalf. I was so aggravated. I was so pissed. But we get to see a little bit of his family dynamics. His parents clearly have immigrated from Sri Lanka to give their kids better opportunities, and so they're very strict about what can and cannot happen in their household. schoolwork must be done. They spend a lot of family time together. Extracurricular activities are limited to a few things here and there because they want them to focus primarily on their studies. So it does give that immigrant parent outlook. I have a parent that is an immigrant, and when I tell you, y'all, all of us kids who have parents that are immigrants, it's a different experience. It's a different experience, and the expectations are very different. My dad also was very much education. You don't need all this extra stuff. Education. Like that was ingrained in me at a young age. So seeing that from the perspective of a different culture was very interesting. But the framework of the story is based on the fact that he wants to be friends with this group of kids, right? He wants to be in the popular circle, which at some point a lot of kids do. Not all kids, but a lot of kids do want to fit in. It makes your middle school experience less traumatizing sometimes. So he's supposed to go to this store, steal a candy bar, and it's supposed to impress this kid. Well, he steals a candy bar, and what he didn't realize is that there's this sweepstakes going on, and he chooses the candy bar that is the sweepstakes winner and wins $1 million. So then it's like, okay, so I've won $1 million, and granted, like, this will be great because it could help my family, and I know that my dad is sending money to my aunt back in Sri Lanka, and I know that this will change things for us. It will change the course of everything. But how do I collect $1 million from a candy bar that I stole? So it's not so much about the sweepstakes and the $1 million as it is a catalyst for a story that is heavily about the character development. So we see him go through these different processes of, okay, how do I handle this situation? I should go to the store. You get to know the store owner, and then you kind of see what his life is like. You are seeing him trying to navigate the relationship that he has with his sister, the relationship that he has with his parents. And so it's very much so about the development of the characters and their interactions with each other, even with the boy who he ends up having a long list of issues with, and seeing that boy's background, his family, and how horrible his family is. So it's all about this community setting. What did surprise me is that there is a good bit of faith content in this book, and it didn't bother me. It's not one of those things where I was like, oh goodness gracious. I would say it plays an important enough role that it does inform a lot of the decisions that he makes and how he goes about processing the things that he's done, and not in an unhealthy way. I think that this is a part of his family's traditions. I think that he ends up really forming this good communication with a really amazing friar. And so if you have a family or a kid that is looking for a middle grade book that not necessarily is like Christian fiction per se, but has some faith content in it, then this might be something that they would look forward to. So I ended up enjoying it, y'all. I thought it was fun. It was entertaining. I loved the character development. There were some moments, especially at the end, when he begins to recognize the sacrifices that his parents have made. I was like, oh yeah, you get it. You get it. There's certain things that will make you see things differently, and it has such a wonderful ending tied to it. So I really appreciate that as well. And the last thing that I have in this category is Pearl. This was a graphic novel that I ended up giving 3.5 stars. I have complicated feelings about this one because I really know that Sherry L. Smith does amazing research. She does a lot of historical based stuff, and so she did a lot of research based off of what happened between the US and Japan during World War II. It focuses on a main character that's living in Hawaii at the time, like right before. It would have been right before World War II. No, World War II was already going on, but it would have been right before the US got pulled in, or right after the US got pulled in. And so her family are Japanese immigrants to Hawaii, and they send her to Japan. And so she's caught in this weird situation of, okay, well, I'm not Japanese enough to be here, but then when I go to America, I'm not really America, so I'm not really American. So it's this in-between feeling again. And she ends up going through a series of different things while she's in Japan. She's there when bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and she kind of details what that experience is like. So, I mean, this is all fictional based off of actual events, but we're following the perspective of this main character. I struggled with this one because I felt like it was so quick for such a deep and heavy topic. It felt very surface level, and because of the work that I know that the author does in terms of historical fiction, I was very shocked. One, that she took on the story itself, and that brings forth this conversation of who gets to tell what stories, because she is not Japanese American from Hawaii, none of that. But I know that she does a lot of research into any historical event. So there's that part of it, there's that conversation. But then there's, which she's been in contact, she based this off of another work, right? So she was in contact with that author and they helped with this process. And so it's not like anything was offensive. I should probably say that. It's not that. It's the fact that the implications of what happened between Japan and the US is so serious that I felt like this should have had a little bit more oomph to it, and it should have been a young adult graphic novel. I think it would have performed better as a young adult graphic novel because so much content had to be cut out of it in order to make it digestible for a younger audience. And there were some moments where you could kind of see how deep it could have gone and how intense it could have gotten, but we couldn't get to that point because of the intended audience. And sometimes I think that there are ways to craft stories that are great for younger audiences, and then sometimes there are stories and topics where, in order to really paint a good picture of the experience of what this main character would have went through, where you know, you're from America, literally. You were born on American soil, and they're telling you you can't come back because you're Japanese. And she's like, no, not really. I mean, yes, but no. So those complex conversations about the racism and the bigotry that existed on America's behalf during that time, it's kind of skimmed over, and it loses it's not that it's losing its meaning or its value, but it makes you as a reader be like, yeah, there's more there though. I know you could do a little bit more storytelling there. So the artwork though was mind-blowingly beautiful. I loved it. It was just, and it was a very simple color palette, very muted tones, but the artwork was impeccable. It was fantastic, but the storytelling just wasn't there for me. And so I was kind of torn because I was like, yes, we have this beautiful piece of art here, but then the storytelling just didn't match it. So I think I settled on giving it a 3.5, but that one I think I expected a little bit more, and it's very, very short, y'all. That's one that you could probably sit down and read in like 30-40 minutes, if that. Okay, so the last thing the last section, because I'm going to go over the graphic novels, comics, and manga that I did end up reading, but I didn't have anything new to add to that section. YA. So I ended up reading a lot of YA this past month. It just happened to work out that way. This month it'll probably end up being a lot more middle grade. Who knows? It's whatever which way the wind blows. So the first one that I ended up reading was Red. Y'all instantaneously should know that this is one of my favorite books of 2025 already. It's amazing. Was this the first book? No, this was the second book I read this year, and it was an instantaneous 5 stars. Unintentional. It just happened to work out that way, but I talk about that more in the mid-month wrap-up. I talked about Us in Ruins. I talked about The Wicked Ones, which was also another 5-star read for me. I did good at first. I did really, really good in the beginning of the month. I'm telling you, I really, really did. Then I read That's Not My Name by Megan Lally. Also another 5-star read. Talk about that in my mid-month wrap up. And it went down after that. But I also read Afterlife, The Last Bookstore on Earth, which is probably easily one of my least favorite books of the month. And then I read 6 other books, which I'm going to tell you about very, very quickly. So the first one that I ended up reading was Joined at the Joints. This is one of the books that I picked off of my shelf from that random book generator situation. This was pretty good. I waffled between 3.5 and 4 stars, but I think I ended up going with 4 stars. This is by Marissa Eller. This is her debut. She also has rheumatoid arthritis, which is what our main character Ivy is dealing with. So she is in a family that most of them are chronically ill. So she has rheumatoid arthritis, her sister has celiac disease, and her mother has lupus. So it is a lot in that household. Ivy is very much so used to sticking within her family. She has social anxiety, but her mom and her sister really, really want her to get out more. And they find a support group for chronically ill teens, and they decide that she should go. And when she's there, she ends up meeting our heroine, not our heroine. She is the heroine. She ends up meeting Grant, and Grant also has rheumatoid arthritis. And so this is the first time that they both have been able to connect with an individual that has the same chronic illness, and they're face to face. Like, you know that other people have it, but to be able to communicate in real time with someone who lives in the same town as you and has the same chronic illness for them was a little bit new. And so it's about their relationship, but it's also about Ivy coming to terms with certain things, like relationships that haven't really worked out, like friendships that haven't really worked out because she doesn't feel comfortable communicating about her chronic illness, trying to put herself out there more, even though she struggles with social anxiety. She is coming to terms with, like, you know, what am I going to do after school? Like, what do I want to be? And she loves cooking. I love the food element. She's struggling with grief in this, and it's closely related to the loss of her grandmother and how she lost her grandmother. And so she's dealing with that. She's dealing with the ups and downs of her chronic illness. I think when I was reading this, I was like, this really gives me The Fault in Our Stars vibes. But the thing about The Fault in Our Stars is that those teens really, honestly, they didn't feel like teenagers. They were having conversations that really felt like adults stuck in teen bodies, which is not to say that teens can't have adult conversations, but there are certain ways in which you can write teens where it's like, I'm questioning whether you're a teen or whether you're an adult. They definitely felt like teens, and it didn't come with the heartbreak that came with The Fault in Our Stars. I also like that Marissa was able to explore a plethora of different topics. I think the one that stuck out to me the most was when we have this kind of like pinnacle moment where Ivy is about to turn 18, which means that she is an adult. It also means that her chronic illness is progressing in a way that she has to change her medication, and she's not excited to do it. And this is something that I learned, that in changing her medication, she has to wait for her body to get readjusted to it, used to it, etc. And so as a result of that, what ends up happening is, you know, the fatigue, the nausea, the hair loss, just the aches and the pains that come with it. And so she's very nervous about that. She goes and she sees the doctor, and they start talking about, okay, well, if you're on this medication and you get pregnant, you know, it could be fatal for the child. And so at this point, we need to consider putting you on birth control. And so she's thinking like, whoa, wait. No, I didn't say I was sexually active. And then it becomes this question of, well, I have a choice in this. I don't have to get on birth control just because you think I'm in the years of childbearing. Like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's my choice. And I think it's very interesting because we're in this point politically in our country, we're talking about access to things like birth control. But I know people who don't like to be on birth control because of how it changes their body, and they'll use other forms of contraceptive. And I think that that was a very interesting conversation to have, that birth control is not an automatic response for everyone, not because they don't believe in being able to choose when you want to have kids, but it may not be the best choice for their anatomy. There are people, there's different forms of contraceptive, right? Like, there are people who are like, yeah, I don't want to have an IUD. Like, I'm not going to do that. There are people, I don't want the implant in my arm. There are people like, I can't be on the pill. I like, you know, maybe TMI, but like, I couldn't do the pill. It was too much ups and downs. It was horrible. Like, I hated it. I really didn't like it. And so I like that conversation was embedded into this book, in a conversation that she had realistically with her mom. And I like that Marissa was able to explore so many different angles. But overall, it was good storytelling. I'm looking forward to see what Marissa's going to write in the future, because this book came out July of last year. Great disability representation. I'm trying to incorporate more disability rep into my reading as I go throughout the year. And this was a good place to start. So the next one that I ended up reading was one that I had on my spreadsheet of books to read in January that were new releases. And I really didn't know much about the book, but it was available after I had purchased it for Libby. And so I was like, okay, I'm just gonna go ahead and listen to it. And it's Where the Heart Should Be by Sarah Crossan. This is my first Sarah Crossan book. Definitely won't be my last, but it's historical fiction, and it is about the Irish potato famine. Now, I was a history major in undergrad, so it's not my first go round with learning about this. However, you know, the English did the Irish dirty. Okay, like, let's just go ahead and put it out there. And I have ties to England myself, and it's embarrassing to see what the English, not that my ancestors had anything to do with this, but, you know, because we would clank and all types of, you know, stuff under, you know, the Queen, the crown. I'm gonna stop because I can get really messy about the ties between England and Jamaica. It's not what we're here for. But holy crap. So it follows a main character by the name of Nell, and we're literally starting at the cusp of the famine, where we start to see the issues with the potatoes and how there's no way that anybody could get any crops at this point, and that a high percentage of the diet of the Irish tenants was based upon this potato crop, and they were getting no potatoes. And then you kind of get to see the relationship between the Irish tenants and the landlords, and how, because the English refused to do anything to help them, they still wanted their imports. They were not helping to provide any more sustenance to these people. It created conflict between the Irish tenants and the Irish landlords, and then you had the English who own all of this land and could care less about anything that was happening. And so we're seeing all of this through Nell's perspective. There's a couple content warnings on this. There is death that is in here, and I think the most interesting part, because there is a romantic aspect to it where we meet another character by the name of Johnny, and his uncle is the one that owns all the land, and he's English, and he's just basically like, I just want to help. He clearly has feelings for Nell. I wasn't invested in their relationship, to be quite honest. I didn't really care. This is why I keep saying that this whole concept and idea that every young adult book needs to have romance needs to quickly exit stage left. I'm not saying that romance shouldn't be present in young adult literature, but every book does not need a romantic element, because this book could have stood on its own without a romance. I think the storytelling was strong enough. The character development was brilliant. I think that these historical references, it made me go and look up things and research things, and I got angry and pissed and frustrated, because I just think colonialism, imperialism, you're all just, oh. It makes you very, very angry, but it helps you learn things. And I think that would have been enough without having to deal with the romance. But Johnny is there. And Johnny does not like the way things are happening to Nell and her family, and so he decides to help out. But honestly, what I was most invested in was the family dynamics, because Nell works at the uncle's house, and she is a maid of sorts, cook-ish type of situation. She works there and she provides for the family, and it's interesting seeing all of the weight, the responsibilities be placed solely on her shoulders to help provide for her family. And her dad's kind of, it's not embarrassment, but it feels like a failure as a parent when you have to rely on your child to help take care of your family. And he does what he thinks is right, and there are a whole bunch of conversations and consequences about the decisions that he makes. It is what it is at the end of the day. It's unfortunate, but it is what it is. I love that. I love that. I think that Crossan really, really did a great job with those family dynamics, the historical fiction aspect of it. I just wasn't invested in the romance. So I did give this 4 stars, but that was the weakest part of this book, was a relationship between Nell and Johnny, because I didn't care. I felt like the ending was rushed. And then it was kind of like, I didn't like the way things were wrapped up. Because there is this question of, is love enough? Which we all know, like, you can love someone, but to be honest with you, love doesn't pay the bills. You know, so you gotta ask. And sometimes you got to make those hard decisions. So, but it was good. I definitely will check out more from Sarah Crossan if you're interested in the historical fiction aspect of it, or if you have a teen reader who likes historical fiction. That is the one to check out. It's written in verse, it's shorter, it's definitely accessible, it's engaging. Highly recommend. So here's the thing. I think when I did my mid-month wrap up, I talked about the fact that I was not going to sugarcoat nor baby any new releases that came out, meaning that I wasn't going to tiptoe around how I was going to review things, because I can review things critically, understand its intended audience, and still tell you, like, I don't think that this was the way it should have been. So one of my most anticipated reads, like, generally, I was really, really looking forward to this, had heard about the book through a couple of different sessions that I had been through with the publisher, and it's Biology Lessons by Melissa Cantor. Of course, I was going to be intrigued by this one because we're talking about the right to choose, bodily autonomy. It is something that is definitely impacting us right now in real time. And I was like, ooh, what a timely book. So I get to the book. It's short. It's shorter than what I expected. It's under 300 pages. I read it over the course of a couple of days. And I was like, okay, we're following a main character by the name of Grace. Grace is this brilliant student that loves biology, is going to go to school in New York, and she ends up tutoring this kid, which this is not saying that because she's smart this doesn't happen, because it does happen. She's smart. She starts hooking up with him. And then one hookup turns into her finding out that she's pregnant. It does happen. That's not the point. Me telling you that she's brilliant is connected to something else, because this is the part I couldn't understand. So rightfully so, she starts panicking. She lives in Texas. Texas is a shit show. We all know this. She lives in Texas. Abortion is outlawed. And she's thinking, well, what am I going to do? Because I can't go through with this, because I have dreams and aspirations to go to New York. And my parents, if they were to find out that I was pregnant, my parents are going to make me keep this kid, because through different, like, things that happen in the book and context clues, parents are conservative. They don't outright say it, but there's things where the dad and the mom will say, well, they just don't share the same values as us. These just don't align with our belief systems. It's clear when she talks about her gay best friend and her mom says certain things. They go to New York and someone mistakes, which I don't know how, someone mistakes the Texas flag for the Confederate flag. I don't know. I'm not sure. you know, whatever. And so Dad's like, yeah, you know, these people just don't share our values. These New Yorkers just don't share our values. I live in the South, baby. I know exactly what that is. There's coded dog whistling crap if I've ever heard it. So we know that. Well, it's weird. It gets so strange from there because abortion has been outlawed, but it's almost as if Grace doesn't know anything about this. Her best friend has to tell her that there are these people who are bounty hunters who will get a reward if they tell on someone who has gotten an abortion or is trying to have an abortion. It's very strange because Grace is completely clueless to this. Her friend is telling her, well, maybe you shouldn't openly Google, you know, where to have an abortion. You shouldn't do any of this. And I'm like, so what world are we living in? One. Two, how does she not know any of this? And what has happened that we have these bounty hunters? There's no context, y'all. You get no context of what has happened in the world. Granted, I don't know if it's supposed to be implied that like you would know that stuff has happened, but even now, the bounty hunter thing I think is what really threw me off because I'm like, okay, if there's bounty hunters, then things have gone really, really left. Like things have gone horrible, right? But there's no explanation. There's nothing, no context clues. Then I start to question, well, what year is it? What is this background that we're living in? So there was that. And I just couldn't reckon with the fact that we have a brilliant character. She's constantly characterized as being exceptionally smart, and she knows nothing about any of this. It just didn't feel realistic. And so I didn't like that. I didn't like that the social aspects in regard to the family are never challenged. It's tied up neatly in the end, and I'm like, this is kind of strange because there would have been some feelings post things happening that she would have towards her family, and yet there's nothing there. It's like, oh, my dad is trying, and I'm like, yeah, but the parents are almost written as if they were bigoted, and so it was very strange. It was very strange. And then this is kind of like its tagline is a love letter to home, but Grace has very conflicting feelings about being in Texas, and then you don't really get a feel for home. It's very two-dimensional. Just like her family felt very like caricatured. Like we clearly get that she comes from a conservative family, but are we doing that to use that as a catalyst for why she is having so many difficulties in relationship to what she wants? I don't know. I don't know. I think that this novel was all over the place, and there wasn't enough time put into development of characters, world development. And yes, it is a socially relevant book. Yes, it is an emotionally charged book. But when you have these pieces and parts missing to the point where the book, you feel like it doesn't make sense, I don't know what to tell you then, because the emotional impact then is lost. Because I'm stuck sitting trying to figure out, like, how do we have this like intelligent character that has no idea that abortion's been banned? How does that happen? And maybe if we were in a world where there was some censorship of information, right, then that would be different. But there's no groundwork there. There's no explanation there. There's no conversation about anything like that. So you're kind of left hanging. I don't know. I was disappointed by this book, y'all. I really, really was pissed about that book. I ended up giving it 2.5 stars. I'm not going to waste any more time talking about it because the level of frustration for me is undeniable. More books. I promise I will be quicker. I promise I'm going to be quick because I did not want this video to be an hour, because my mid-month was like an hour long. And here we are about to make this another hour-long book. Okay, so I did end up reading another 5-star YA book after that. I think I deserved. Okay, after going through that, after 2 books that I thought I was going to enjoy this month being 2.5 star reads. I needed a good one. And so I picked up a 2024 release that I had been meaning to get to, and that is The Glass Girl by Kathleen Glasgow. I had read her before. It's the Agathas was a book but she wrote that with another author. So I read that. I liked that well enough. I think I gave it 3.5 or 4 stars. Why didn't nobody tell me that Kathleen writes books like this? This book is up there for me with Heroine by Mindy McGinnis, which is another YA real as shit book. If you know me, if you know anything about me, and when I talk about YA realistic fiction, you know that Mindy McGinnis's Heroine is at the top, baby. Without fail. It's always going to be at the top. It is always going to be at the tippity top. I did not know that this was going to be that. As a matter of fact, I'm not going to lie to y'all. I didn't know what this book was about. I was like, Glass Girl. What is this going to be about? I mean, it literally just has a glass on it. And I was like, okay, I didn't read the description. Just started reading the book. Oh, hold up. So this deals with alcohol addiction. Just want to go ahead and put that out there. If it's something that you don't feel comfortable picking up, or you have a teen reader and they're not ready for that content, I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there. This does deal with alcohol addiction. I'm pretty sure it's probably in the summary somewhere. And yeah, it is in the summary. I just didn't read the summary of it because I was just like, I'm just gonna go into it. This is tough. This was a 5-star read for me. It is up there. It packed an emotional punch. I really don't know after this. Like, someone asked me, like, had I ever read any other Mindy McGinnis books after Heroine? I was like, no. Because as much as I love that book, and I've read that book multiple times, Mindy McGinnis has made me terrified to read anything else by her. Now, Kathleen got me because I read the Agathas first. But after this bad boy, I don't know if y'all gonna catch me picking up anything else. Because Kathleen tore me to shreds with this. We're focusing on a main character that's 15 years old. Her name is Bella. Bella has her first drink with her grandmother. It's a very casual thing, but her grandmother passes away, and it has a intense impact on her. Her parents are separated, and she copes by drinking, and she doesn't realize that she has a drinking problem. As a matter of fact, you won't believe how long it takes for her to kind of reckon with it, which is very realistic. But as a reader, you see it very quickly. She uses it to cope, to deal with everything, but she doesn't think it's a problem. And particularly at that age, granted, I don't think I had my first drink till I was like 16, 17 years old. This is around that time where, you know, kids are drinking. We don't want them to, but it does happen. And when everybody's doing it, it becomes hard to see when things are an addiction. I think that college is another good example. And it made me think after reading this, how many kids did I go to college with that were actually struggling with alcoholism? And we didn't know because everybody was binge drinking. It was just a thing starting on Thursday night, Thirsty Thursday. And we went out and we just drank. And I wonder how many kids were actually struggling with it. But because drinking was so normalized, it was hard to see that. And in this, you kind of see the same thing. Although it's not as, I think, intense as college because it's a completely different ballgame. You do see high school kids drinking, and because that behavior is normalized, it's hard to figure out when someone is actually struggling with an addiction. And so we follow her through her process of an addiction. We follow her through rehab and beyond. And let me tell you, this book is real. As a mom, I think my heart broke for Bella so much. I've never had my heart just so invested in a character, unless you're talking about Heroine, where I'm like, please just don't do this. Don't do this. And literally like vocalizing, like, don't do it. Don't do it. And knowing good and well, like, she's going to make this decision. And I think that Kathleen is she's very considerate of how she handles the topic. It's not taken lightly. It's not done in a lackadaisical way. It's not done in a joking way. She's very real. She talks about the struggles that come with having an addiction, even when you go to rehab, the ups and downs that come with that, the people who are supposed to support you and be in your corner not really supporting you, especially when they know that you're battling with it, and how that environment can drive you back to not making the best decisions. And when I tell you, you root for Bella time and time again, and it doesn't end on this perfect note, which, if you know me too, you know those are my favorite types of books when it comes to YA realistic fiction, because the realistic part of it, it's important to know that sometimes stories just don't have happy endings. They have real endings, because that's just life, and this is the way life happens. This book is brilliant. It's a chunker. It's long. It's well over 400 pages. It is almost topping out at 450, but easily one of my favorite books of all time. And I don't give that stamp of approval to many. I can have 5-star reads, but favorite book of all time, I'm not giving that out to a lot of books, but this was one. All right, so after that, I read The Royal Heirs Academy. You know, I don't really have much to say about this book. It was okay. It was entertaining enough. I listened to it after finishing The Glass Girl because I needed something that was not as intense. It is a contemporary royalty competition where it takes place in this fictitious kingdom. It reminded me of, what's that movie with Julie Andrews and oh girl, I can't remember. Y'all remember with me. Julie Andrews did the 2 movies, and the country that she's from is not real. Why can't the Princess Diaries? It had a Princess Diaries kind of feel to it, the fake country, but everything around it, like all the other countries talked about, like they were real. But we have a king who hid away 3 of his family members that could possibly be heirs to the throne. And he creates this competition where they go to this boarding school in this fake country where they have to compete for the ability to inherit his throne. But he also throws in another person that is not an heir, but is a commoner, but lives in the country because he wants that perspective. And so they're taking classes, they're interacting with each other. 3 of them are cousins. And of course, this 4th character is not related. And so there is a love triangle of sorts that's going on. It was messy. It was drama. I mean, they pretty much had to do some pretty shady things to each other in order to be able to be favorable in the king's eye, anything to get ahead, because he was going to announce who was going to get the keys to his throne, essentially. It really, I don't know. It was okay. It's told through 4 alternating perspectives, and it wasn't hard to keep up with the 4 characters, but there end up being perspectives that you're more interested in. Like the commoner's perspective I was really interested in. And then one of the guys that is a part of the trio of cousins I was interested in, but the other 2 I was kind of like, I could do without their perspectives. I could care less. So that kind of makes for an unevenly paced book. I thought it was a little bit longer than what it needed to be, but the drama was enough, and the ending was kind of effed up enough where I was like, ooh, okay, all right. I probably would read the next book. This is not a series that I would buy, but it was solid enough that when the next book probably will come out next year or 2027, I probably will pick it up. I ended up giving it 3 stars. And the last thing that I read was another Megan Lawley book, 2 books in a month from one author. This is her second book. I don't know what it is about YA thriller and mystery writers, but I keep up with their bibliographies much better than any other genre in this age category. Karen McManus, Holly Jackson, anytime they put out a book, your girl finna read it. It's gonna be the same thing with Megan. Anytime she put out a book, I'm finna read it, because of course earlier in the month I read That's Not My Name and I gave it 5 stars. So I read her new one, No Place Left to Hide, and to be quite fair, it wasn't as strong as That's Not My Name. I gave it 3.5 stars. It was good. It did have a twist to it where I was telling everybody at work about it. I was like, do you care if I spoil this book? And most people were like, no. I was like, okay, I'm gonna spoil it for you. And it was interesting enough because it kind of is a trick on you as a reader. I don't want to go into too much detail, but we're focusing on a main character who comes from a lot of money, and she had a friend that died, and supposedly she was connected to this death. She was found to be innocent, but of course, you know, public opinion is a little different than what the police come out and say. Her dad is up to become a judge, and she's trying to get into Yale, so she's waiting to hear if she got into Yale. And then, you know, she gets her acceptance, she goes to this party, and then things go left because somebody is trying to force her to tell the truth about what really happened that night. And she's like, tell the truth about what happened? My friend died in an accident and people keep blaming me, and I don't know why they're blaming me. Like, this is absolutely insane. And so you flip back and forth between when the incident happened and the present time, and so through the alternating perspectives you kind of get to see what exactly happened. I don't think it was as hard-hitting as her first one because the twist was kind of comical and not it wasn't funny, but it was literally so out there. I was like gagged, and then I was laughing like, this is insane. So take that as you will. It's the only thing that I can tell you. I can say Megan is a good writer. Like, I do think that, like, when it comes down to it, fundamentally, like, she's a good writer. She's entertaining. I think she has these good concepts and ideas, and so I'm really looking forward to seeing what, like, she comes out with in the future. But yeah, 3.5 stars, not as strong as the first, but whatever her next book is, I definitely will be checking it out. I think she has one that is slated to come out in 2026, so we'll see how that one does. All right, y'all, so that was the last young adult book I read. I did, like I said, I did read some graphic novels, comics, and manga. I'm going to tell you the titles really quick, but I talked about all of these in my mid-month wrap-up. That was Oshinoko Volume number 6, Harley Quinn Volume number 1, Nana Volume 3, which, I'm pissed because the copy's right over there and I just didn't get it. The Dangerous Convenience Store, which is also over there, and I just didn't get it. And then How I Met My Soulmate. So if you want to know my thoughts about those, make sure you check out that mid-month review. Oh, and I also forgot to write that I read, oh goodness gracious, y'all, I'm just forgetting everything. I also read The Remarried Empress Volume number 5, which was another one of my favorites for the year. But all that's in the mid-month wrap-up. And if you're doing the math, you're probably like, wait, you're missing a few things. Yes, I am missing a few things because I don't talk about my adult fiction and nonfiction that I read on this channel. I completely talk about that material for Patreon because this is a kidlit focus outside of the graphic novels and manga sometimes. This is primarily a kidlit focus channel. So I do provide those reviews and TBRs and all that stuff and that content for Patreon. So if you do want to see that content, be sure to check it out there. But let me know in the comment box down below what you ended up reading for the month of January. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications. If you're looking for ways to follow me on social media, support me via Patreon, wish list, whatever, yada yada yada, those are down in the description box as well. And I will be back with another review soon. Bye.